Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to another episode of the Talk Room series of podcasts. I'm Wendy, and today we're diving into an incredibly interesting and important topic of premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD for short. This is a continuation episode on a previous episode we did on this subject. We will be looking at this and how you can be your best self, even when faced with this particular challenge, by leveraging the power of counselling and therapeutic support. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Ian. Ian is a senior accredited National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society member and the founder of Hope Therapy and Counselling Services. Hope is a counselling and coaching organisation offering support throughout the UK for a wide range of concerns and challenges and works with goal setting on a very regular basis. So, a warm welcome to you, Ian.
Thank you, Wendy. And let me return the favour by introducing yourself. Wendy is a highly experienced CBT psychotherapist. She's worked in the field of mental health and well-being for over 35 years now. And we're both passionate about helping people navigate their mental health, their relationship, and their well-being journeys. So today's discussion about PMDD is going to be a really crucial part of this.
Yeah, absolutely, Ian. And as said, this is a continuation episode on this very important subject. But for those that haven't seen the previous episode, Ian, could you just start by saying a little bit more about what is PMDD and what it is?
Of course. So PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, is a really debilitating condition that it affects people in the lead up to their periods. It's not just about feeling a bit moody or a bit bloated before your cycle. It's a really severe condition that can impact your mood, your relationships, your work, your overall well-being. And for some, it can feel like clocking into a different version of yourself every month. One that can be incredibly overwhelming, one that can make you incredibly anxious, irritable, or even hopeless on occasions. And that can be absolutely exhausting for people.
Absolutely, Ian. I totally agree with that. And some might say that some of it is similar to PMS. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about why that isn't the case and what the differences are.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a common point of confusion. PMS or premenstrual syndrome is something a lot of people experience. It might come with physical symptoms like bloating or breast tenderness, and also mild mood changes as well. But it's generally manageable for most people. PMDD, on the other hand, is like PMS amplified by 100. The emotional and psychological symptoms are much more severe. So think intense mood swings, extreme irritability, deep levels of sadness, or even feelings of despair for some people. Some people with PMDD describe it as feeling like they have depression for 2 weeks of every month, only for those feelings to suddenly lift once their period starts. And it's not just the emotional side, there are physical symptoms too. There can be things like fatigue, brain fog, joint pain, headaches. It really is a full body experience for some people. Some people even have intrusive thoughts or feel completely disconnected from themselves, which can be a really scary thing for some people. So if that sounds familiar to people, first of all, they're not alone. PMDD is real. It's not just in their heads. And it can be an incredibly challenging thing to live with. But here's the good news: support is available for people. There are ways to better manage it for many people, and therapy can play a big part in helping people just to navigate those really intense ups and downs that can come with the condition. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today: how counselling and therapy can just help people with PMDD feel a little bit more in control, a little bit more understood, and crucially, a little bit more supported as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Ian. That's really clear. And I could just imagine that people with PMDD, as opposed to people with PMS, can be left feeling, I don't know, very misunderstood, especially if they don't really understand they have it, or even haven't received a diagnosis.
And one of the hardest things about PMDD for many can be just getting to the point where you actually know what's going on for you, where you start to understand what's happening. So, for many people, the journey to diagnosis can be incredibly long. It can be incredibly frustrating. Um, and many people say it can be quite an invalidating process to have to navigate. Um, PMDD isn't something that is routinely checked for. And because its symptoms overlap with other conditions like depression or anxiety, for example, it can sometimes be misdiagnosed. A lot of people are told, oh, that's just bad PMS, or worse, maybe you're overreacting. And that kind of dismissal can just make you doubt yourself. It can leave you feeling like you're being too sensitive, or that you just need to push through. And here's where therapy can really be valuable, because it can just give you a space where you don't have to prove what you're experiencing. You don't have to prove that it's real. You don't have to justify why your mood crashes every month, or why simple tasks suddenly feel impossible to you. A good therapist who's experienced at working with PMDD will listen, they will validate the experience, and then just help you make sense of what's going on and what's happening without judgment. And for many people, just having someone say, that sounds really hard, and it makes sense that you're struggling, can be just such a huge relief. Because when you feel seen and when you feel understood, it just starts to make it starts to take away some of the shame, some of the frustration that you feel. It helps you move from thinking what's wrong with me to, okay, this is something I'm dealing with, and I can find ways to manage it. So there can be a real shift in emphasis that can come with that, and that's the key. Therapy isn't about fixing PMDD, it's about helping you to navigate it in a way that starts to feel a little bit more manageable, a little bit less overwhelming, and a little bit less isolating for people. It's about building strategies that actually support you rather than leaving you feeling like you're fighting against yourself every month.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, it sounds as though there's a lot of people with this condition that must be feeling very misunderstood. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that feels like?
Yeah, absolutely. So most people, as I say, will know what PMS is, but many people would never have heard of PMDD at all. In fact, one of the most frustrating things about PMDD is how hard it is to get a diagnosis in the first place, or just to be taken seriously. Um, for so many people, the journey starts with noticing those really intense emotional shifts every month, feelings like something just isn't right, and then being met with confusion or even dismissal when they try to reach out for help. PMDD isn't widely understood, even in some medical settings. And many people are told it's just PMS, or it's normal to feel emotional before your period. Um, but this isn't just a case of feeling a bit off. PMDD can be completely debilitating for some people. And when doctors or friends or family don't understand, it can feel really isolating, like you're stuck dealing with it completely on your own. And that's where therapy with the right person can be such a valuable space. A good therapist who's experienced at working with PMDD won't just dismiss what you're going through. Instead, they'll listen, they'll validate the experience and just help you to make some sense of it. You don't have to prove that there's something wrong. You just get to be honest about how you're feeling. And that in itself can be a huge relief to many, many people. When you feel seen, when you feel understood, it starts to remove some of the self-doubt that we can have. And therapy just gives you permission to say, yes, this is hard. Yes, it's real. And yes, I deserve support. And from there, you get to start building tools, to start building strategies to help manage it rather than feeling like you're constantly fighting against yourself the whole time.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. So what you're saying, it sounds like we need to open up the question about counselling can be beneficial for people struggling with PMDD. Is that right?
Absolutely. Um, so living with PMDD isn't just about dealing with physical symptoms or mood swings. It takes a huge emotional toll, and the unpredictable shift in mood and energy and perspective can make daily life just feel like a constant battle. One day you might feel like yourself, motivated and capable, and the next it's like the weight of the world is suddenly on your shoulders, and everything feels so hard, everything feels impossible, and that kind of emotional whiplash can just feel absolutely exhausting. And that's where the right counselling can just make such a difference. So, again, it's not about fixing PMDD, because right now we're not looking at things that are completely curative, but it's about finding ways to better manage the distress or to build self awareness, to develop coping strategies that actually support you through those incredibly difficult phases.
Hmm. Okay, thank you that, Ian. That's really useful. Um, can we now move on to talk about some of the key areas where therapy can help with this condition?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first area that we might think about is what we would term emotional dysregulation. And one of the biggest struggles with PMDD is this emotional dysregulation, those really intense, those overwhelming feelings that can just hit us from nowhere. You might go from feeling absolutely fine to suddenly feeling rage or deep sadness or intense anxiety. And the hardest part can be it just doesn't feel rational to you sometimes. And therapy can just help us by giving you tools to pause, to recognize what's happening and respond in a way that doesn't add more distress. And there are approaches like things like CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, or DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit more later, um, uh, which can just help us to manage that intensity of emotion. So instead of feeling completely consumed by them, you learn ways just to ride that wave and to regain some of the control. We might also look at things like relationship difficulty as well, and that can be another really big challenge for people. Relationships um, can be impacted by PMDD, PMDD doesn't just affect us. It can affect our interactions with our partners, with our family, with our friends, our work colleagues. So during that luteal phase, when symptoms start to peak, you might feel extra sensitive to criticism, for example. You might feel more withdrawn. You might start to feel more irritable. And that can lead to miscommunication, it can lead to arguments, or just feelings of guilt once the symptoms start to ease again. And counselling can just provide a space to start to unpack some of those patterns and develop better ways of communicating. It can help you just to express what you need from loved ones, to start setting boundaries, and looking at ways of repairing relationships that may have been strained by the effect of PMDD. And couples therapy can also play a really important role within this as well. Again, working with somebody that's experienced that at working with PMDD. It can just be really helpful, helping partners to understand what's happening, so that they can offer support rather than taking things personally during that phase. And then we might look at things like past trauma and triggers. And this is something which isn't talked about hugely. How past trauma can make PMDD even harder to manage. So if you have a history of trauma, whether it's childhood experiences or past relationships, or difficulty with particular life events, those emotions can resurface when PMDD symptoms hit. It's like the brain becomes more vulnerable during that particular phase, and those old wounds can suddenly start to feel more raw again. And again, therapy can just start to untangle some of that a little bit by working through the past trauma in a safe and supportive way. By doing that, we can just start to identify the triggers that make PMDD symptoms even worse. And over time, that can just make the emotional lows feel less overwhelming to us, and just start to reduce the sense of being trapped in those old patterns that we may feel very connected with. And then there's work around self-identity, and just the general fluctuation in mental states. And that's one of the really challenging aspects of PMDD. It's just how it can make you feel like two different people sometimes. So when symptoms are gone, you might feel really clear-headed, you might feel really optimistic, you might feel fully yourself. But when PMDD kicks in, it can feel like you become somebody completely different. It can feel like someone you don't even recognize on a day-to-day basis. And that can really create a struggle in terms of self-identity. So therapy can just help to bridge that gap a little bit. It allows you to explore who you are beyond your symptoms. So PMDD doesn't define your entire sense of self. It can also help you to develop self-compassion, so compassion for yourself. So instead of feeling ashamed or blaming yourself for those difficult days, you can just start to acknowledge that this is something happening to you, that you are reacting to a condition, not something that's wrong with you. And that can really just be a change in emphasis in terms of how we think about ourselves.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ian. That's really useful. Thank you. And I wonder whether you could tell us a little bit more about the types of therapy that can be useful for this condition.
Yeah, and the first thing to say is that we'd always recommend working with a counsellor or a therapist that knows about PMD, that understands it, that's experienced at working with it. It's a complex area. And it's important that the support is not only a validating experience for people, but the focus itself can be targeted around the specific needs of the person looking for support. But in terms of the types of approach, those can be really varied. But I'll describe a couple that are really quite common. And the first that you will obviously know about, Wendy, is cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT. And this is a really widely used therapy for managing mental health challenges more generally. And it can be incredibly useful for some of the associated challenges that can accompany PMDD. So one of the big struggles with PMDD is the way it can just distort our thoughts. You might suddenly feel like you're not good enough, that people don't care about you, or that nothing in your life is going right. And these thoughts can be really intense, and they can feel completely true in the moment, but they're often driven by the PMDD rather than by reality. And CBT just helps by teaching us to recognize those patterns and just start to challenge them. So instead of automatically believing a thought like I'm a failure or no one wants to be around me, we may start to step back and just to ask, is this thought actually based on fact, or is it the PMDD that's talking to me at the moment? So a real change in emphasis to the thoughts. It's not about forcing yourself to think positively. It's about creating balance so that the PMDD doesn't hijack our perception of ourselves and the world around us during that particular phase. There are also therapeutic approaches referred to as DBT, which is dialectical behavioural therapy. And that can be helpful for people struggling with PMDD. And that approach is all about managing really intense emotions, such as those that can often be felt with people struggling with PMDD. So it focuses on four primary areas. The first is mindfulness, which is really about just learning to stay present, learning to stay grounded, rather than being swept up in overwhelming emotions. The second is distress tolerance, which is about developing healthy ways to cope when emotions feel completely unbearable. The third is about emotional regulation, and that's about understanding what triggers your mood and the shifts in your mood, and learning strategies to keep them from escalating. And then the final one is about interpersonal effectiveness. It's about handling relationships more smoothly. It's about finding ways of managing emotions that make that communication more difficult in the first place. So a big part of DBT is learning that emotions, even incredibly strong emotions, will pass, and having practical skills to get through those really tough moments. And that can just help make a huge difference in terms of how PMDD affects life on a day-to-day basis. We then might work with things like mindfulness and self-compassion. And mindfulness, again, is another really, really powerful tool for managing PMDD. It's something that can be incorporated into different therapeutic approaches. And the idea is really simple. So instead of getting lost in the overwhelming emotion of self-criticism, mindfulness just helps you just to stay present, stay connected with what's happening without judgment. So, for example, if you're experiencing a PMDD mood crash, mindfulness can just help you to step back and notice. Um, okay, I'm feeling really anxious right now. I notice that my chest is tight, my thoughts are racing. I notice that this is uncomfortable, but it won't last forever. And just that awareness of what's going on, that real moment awareness can just stop you from spiraling into panic and despair. And alongside mindfulness, really two sides of the same coin is self-compassion, which is also really key to this. It's incredibly easy just to beat yourself up during an episode of PMDD, thinking, why am I like this? Why can't I just get things together? But therapy can help shift that perspective. So instead of criticism, self-compassion teaches you to just be able to say, I'm struggling right now, and that's okay. I deserve kindness. I deserve support, just like anybody else going through this would. And then trauma-informed therapy. So for some people, and we've touched on this a little bit already, for some people, PMDD doesn't exist in isolation. It can bring up past traumas or intensify unresolved emotions that we're feeling. And if that's the case, a more trauma-informed therapist can just help you to explore how past experiences might be affecting your current symptoms. So that doesn't that doesn't mean reliving the trauma or digging up painful memories that you're not ready to talk about. Instead, it's about creating a safe space where you can process emotions in a way that feels more manageable. And then over time, that can just start to reduce the intensity of PMDD symptoms and how you and just help you to feel a little bit more grounded. We then might look at things like what we would refer to as psychoeducation. Um, and sometimes just understanding what's happening in your body and in your brain can be a huge relief. And this is where psychoeducation really comes in. So learning about PMDD, what triggers those symptoms, and what your own personal cycle looks like. And the right therapy can help you to start to track some of those patterns in your mood and in your behaviors so that PMDD becomes more predictable to us. So instead of feeling completely blindsided every month, you start to notice, I'm in that luteal phase. No wonder I feel the way that I'm beginning to feel at the moment. And with that awareness, we can then put coping strategies in place before things start to spiral for us. So it's about being preemptive with these things. And I guess some final thoughts around it might just be to say that there are various different therapeutic approaches, and the right one really depends on who you are as a person. It depends on what your needs are, what your personality is, and what feels most helpful. So it's not a one size fits all approach, and that's why working with somebody experienced can be really helpful. Some people benefit from really structured approaches like CBT. Others find mindfulness and self-compassion incredibly helpful. So other people might find a mixture of different approaches really, really helpful for them. But the important thing is knowing that help is out there and that you don't have to go through things completely on your own. You don't have to just suffer on your own every month, and that with the right support, many people find that it's absolutely possible to start to better manage their symptoms, to reduce the stress and the distress that they're going through, and just start to reclaim a little bit more of a sense of control over their lives as well.
Mm. Thank you, Ian. That's really very, very interesting. Thank you so much for that. And that tells us about the overall counselling approach. But I wonder if you could also tell us a little bit more about some of the counselling strategies that could be helpful for people to know about.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a really important question. Um, so again, an experienced counsellor or an experienced therapist who knows about the condition, the presentation, and understands PMDD can really help you focus in on a number of key areas, a number of coping strategies, and we have people at Hope here. Who work with PMDD, and some of the things that they work with people that struggle with PMDD with is maybe just starting by understanding your cycle a little bit better. So one of the most powerful things can simply be to track your cycle. So PMDD symptoms typically appear in that luteal phase. So that's the 2 weeks leading up to your period. And just by tracking your symptoms every month, you start to notice certain patterns. When do mood swings start? When do you feel the most fatigued or the most irritable? Are there certain days that always feel the hardest? And knowing that can just help you to prepare a little bit better. So instead of feeling like PMDD is just hitting you out of nowhere, you can start to anticipate where those symptoms might show up and put extra self-care measures in place. And there are some really amazing apps out there that can help you, things like Clue and Flow, but a simple journal can really just can help you do it as well if you're not into if you're not into apps. And then there might be lifestyle adjustments that can be really, really helpful. And whilst lifestyle adjustments aren't necessarily a cure for PMDD, they can often make symptoms a little easier for some people. So the first thing might be about looking at things like nutrition. And blood sugar spikes and crashes can just make mood swings worse. So just trying to eat balanced meal, balancing protein and healthy fats and complex carbohydrates. Just having awareness of those types of things can be really helpful. Things like exercise. And I know that when we're in the middle of a PMDD episode, exercise may be the last thing that we want to do. But even gentle movement, like a walk or yoga, can really boost mood and reduce anxiety. And some people that are able to exercise have commented on just how much of a benefit that can be to them. Things like sleep and poor sleep can make PMDD symptoms so much worse. So creating a bedtime routine, so reducing screen time before bed, aiming to try to get between 7 and 9 hours sleep to the extent that that's possible, can just start to make a real difference to people. And also things like caffeine and alcohol as well. Some people find that caffeine can make anxiety worse, for example, whilst alcohol for some people can really intensify mood swings. So if you notice a connection between caffeine and alcohol and symptoms, it might help to cut back to manage your consumption during that luteal phase. And then there might be things around emotional regulation strategies that we would look at with people. So when PMDD hits, it emotions can just feel incredibly overwhelming to us. So there are some quick coping strategies that can just help some people when they're feeling out of control. So there might be grounding techniques that we might look at. There might be breathing exercises that we might look at. There might be self-soothing practices. So almost having a PMDD toolkit with comforting things uh, in it. And that might be things like calming music, there might be things like essential oils, it might be a weighted blanket for some people. Again, it's getting to know yourself and getting to know what's helpful to you. And then there might be work around cognitive reframing as well. So just reminding yourself this feeling is temporary. This is PMDD. It's not me. And some people even find things like writing affirmations or reminders in a journal incredibly helpful. So there's a whole range of different things and different strategies that we can look at. One of the things that can be incredibly helpful is just working around communication boundaries as well. And PMDD can place a strain on relationships, as has already been discussed, whether that's partners or family or work colleagues. So just being open about what we're experiencing can help others support us slightly better. So we might look at things like setting expectations. So if you know that certain days are particularly hard for us, letting our loved ones know, letting them know ahead of time. And that could just be a simple, hey, I might be feeling off this week, just a heads up. And that can just help to prevent misunderstandings. Using I statements can be really helpful. And what this is just about reframing how we communicate. So instead of saying something like, you're not supporting me, we might think about saying something like, I feel overwhelmed when I'm going through this and I need some extra patience, some extra support. So there's just a change in emphasis about how we communicate, which is less likely to cause an escalation with our partners. And there's something in there just about giving ourselves permission to set boundaries as well. It's okay to say no to plans. It's okay to take breaks, or to ask for space when we need it. Your welfare during that really intense period is really, really important. So just learning that it's okay to set appropriate boundaries can be a really important part of the work. Self-compassion can be one of the hardest things about PMDD. Um, uh, we have this tendency to self-blame. And it's really easy to feel like we're just too much, or that you should just get over it. But none of it is your fault. And counseling or therapy can just help in that area. It can just, even outside of the sessions itself, just practicing self-compassion can be really important. Just trying to talk to yourself the way you talk to a close friend. So instead of, I'm so broken, remind ourselves, I'm having a hard time right now, and that's okay. And that's exactly what I would say to close friends. And then just being realistic about what you can do during that PMDD phase. Maybe this isn't the time to embark on a really big project or a really big social event. That's okay. So just giving yourself a little bit of grace during those periods can, and just learning to be able to feel comfortable with that can be really important. So again, a final thought might just be, we acknowledge that PMDD is tough. Anybody that struggles with PMDD knows that. There's no sugarcoating that, but you don't have to go through everything alone. Counseling and therapy, lifestyle adjustments, emotional coping strategies, self-compassion, they can all make a difference for many, many people. So if you're struggling, reach out, whether it's to a therapist, whether it's to a support group, whether it's to a doctor or a friend, just somebody that understands, and finding a space where you feel seen and validated it really is so important.
Mm. Thank you, Ian. That was very comprehensive. Thank you so much for that. Um, so, Ian, you did mention a couple of times about working with someone who understands and preferably has experience of PMDD. Can you just tell us a little bit more about this, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's important to say that we as counsellors and therapists more generally are not medically trained. We don't diagnose, we don't prescribe. And PMDD is an incredibly complex condition. And for many people, a combination of medical and therapeutic approaches might work best for you. And that might mean speaking with a GP or speaking with a gynecologist or another healthcare professional about options like hormone treatments, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, or other medical interventions might be really helpful alongside alongside therapy. Therapy can play a really valuable role, but so can medical interventions for some people. So it's about having awareness of both. At Hope Therapy and Counselling, we have therapists who are very experienced in working with PMDD. And whilst we don't offer medical treatment, what we do offer is a space to process the emotional impact of PMDD, because it's not just about hormones, it's about relationships, work, and that sense of self, managing distress, managing mood swings, and just using coping strategies that complement a medical approach if that's helpful to you. And then just exploring underlying patterns. Say, for example, if past trauma or anxiety is making PMDD symptoms feel worse, just being able to explore those things. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is not facing it alone. So whether through therapy or medical support or a mixture of both, there are options out there and there is help available for people. And again, a closing thought around this question, Wendy, might just be that the most important thing is not to face it alone. So whether through therapy or medical support or that sort of hybrid of both, there is help available. And if anything within today's episode has resonated with people, I really just encourage them to reach out, whether it's to a doctor, whether it's to a therapist or a support group. And if you'd like to explore how counselling or therapy might help, as I say, we have therapists on our team with a lot of experience in the area, and there are other people out there as well that also have good experience at working with this really, really important area. So it's about just finding the right fit, and we're always really happy to have a chat and just to see whether there is somebody in the team that might be the right fit for people.
Okay, thank you for that, Ian. So finally, Ian, if someone has listened to this podcast and they feel they might benefit from professional help, what should they do next?
Yeah, so again, organisations like Hope Therapy and Counselling are here to help people. We've got a team of experienced counsellors and therapists who focus on really wide-ranging issues, but including PMDD. Our website is www.hopefulminds.co.uk. And there's a whole range of free resources and detailed information about the services we provide, including PMDD support. We also offer free consultations to people, which is just a gentle discussion in a really unpressurized way where people can just explain what it is they're going through, and we in turn can explain a little bit more about what might be suitable for them. And Wendy, you too, you're a hugely experienced therapist who's worked with many clients facing a whole range of different presentations, including PMDD, but not restricted to that. So maybe just sharing to people a little bit about yourself and how they can get in touch with you.
Yes, thank you, Ian. So my website is my name, wendycastellino.com, and you can contact me via there. And it tells us more about the services that I offer and how I can help people with a whole range of problems there. So thank you so much, Ian, for all that really wise information about PMDD. And I'm sure a lot of people find it very useful because it's not a very common subject it's talked about. Yet so many people who do suffer from it and suffer terribly. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for everyone for listening. And just ask people who are listening, please subscribe, rate, and share this episode with anyone who could use a little boost in turning their resolutions into reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, everyone.